January 15, 1918. Leon Trotsky signs a decree creating the Red Army with 50,000 volunteers. By 1984, 4 theater high commands control 3 million troops and 40,000 tanks, the largest ground force ever assembled. June 22, 1941, the command structure loses 600,000 men at Kiev in the single worst military disaster in history. May 7, 1992, a bureaucratic decree dissolves it all without firing a shot. 74 years of Soviet military command evolution, from commissars overriding battalion commanders to theater commands larger than entire NATO armies. Explained. March 1941. The Soviet Union fields the largest military force on Earth. 16 military districts span the country. The arsenal is breathtaking. 23,000 tanks, 18,000 aircraft. More armored vehicles than Germany, Britain, and France combined. The command structure mirrors the scale. Armies contain 3 to 5 divisions. Fronts, equivalent to Western Army groups, command 4 armies each. 200,000 to 400,000 troops per front. On paper, the system looks formidable. Field commanders lead. Commissars supervise. Stavka, the supreme command forming in Moscow, coordinates everything from the Kremlin. June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa shatters the illusion. 3.8 million Axis troops cross the border into Soviet territory, defended by 5.5 million men. Day 1, casualties tell the story. 4,000 Soviet dead, 10,000 wounded. The command structure, built for political control, faces its greatest test. And within hours, it begins to crack. June 22, 1941. The same day German tanks roll across the border. Joseph Stalin forms Stavka in the Moscow Kremlin, Supreme High Command. The name comes from old Russian military tradition. But the organization is pure Stalin. He chairs it personally. Georgian, born 1878, he will promote himself to generalissimus in 1943, the only man in Soviet history to hold that rank. Beside him sits Georgy Zhukov, chief of the General Staff. Russian, born 1896. Zhukov will later plan Operation Bagration. 2.3 million troops, 5,000 tanks, inflicting 400,000 German casualties. The third corps member is Semyon Timoshenko, defense commissar. These 3 men, sitting in the Kremlin, can override any field commander instantly. A colonel on the front line makes a tactical decision. Stavka can reverse it within the hour. The centralization is absolute. No Wehrmacht general faced anything comparable. German field marshals had operational freedom. Soviet front commanders waited for Moscow's approval. The question hanging over the entire war is whether this extreme centralization will save the Red Army or destroy it. July 10, 1941. Stavka tries something new. 3 main commands, called directions, to manage different theaters. Each direction controls multiple fronts. Northwestern direction goes to Marshal Kliment Voroshilov, Russian, born 1890. His job is Leningrad. The Northwestern Front and Baltic Fleet fall under his command. Southwestern direction goes to Marshal Semyon Budyonny. Born 1883, he commands 800,000 troops defending Ukraine and Kiev. Budyonny is a cavalry legend from the Russian Civil War. He tells his staff they will bury the Germans in the Dnieper. Within months, 600,000 Soviet troops are encircled at Kiev. The largest single military disaster in history. Budyonny's cavalry expertise means nothing against panzers. Voroshilov fares no better. Leningrad's defense collapses into chaos. Both marshals are eventually relieved. After the war, Soviet military analysts write brutal critiques. The directions often worsened leadership. Improvised headquarters created confusion instead of coordination. 3 separate command layers, Stavka, direction, front, meant decisions took days when hours mattered. The experiment is a catastrophic failure. Late July 1941. Budyani gets a second chance. Chief Command of the North Caucasus Direction, headquarters at Rostov, 45 degrees 12 minutes north, 39 degrees 42 minutes east. The forces under his command are staggering. The Crimean Front with 170,000 troops, Sevastopol area defenses, the North Caucasus Military District, the Black Sea Fleet, 6 battleships, 85,000 naval personnel, the Azov Flotilla, 2 rifle divisions, 2 brigades, 1 cavalry corps with 4 divisions, 32,000 cavalrymen. Budyani reports to Stalin that Crimea defenses are breached, but Sevastopol holds with fleet aid. The Kerch Feodosia operation unfolds over winter 1941 to 40. 2. 46,000 Soviet troops killed or missing in action. 65,000 captured. May 19, 1942. The North Caucasus Direction is dissolved. Total sector losses reach 390,000. The command is reformed as the North Caucasus Front, 1 layer of bureaucracy removed. The lesson is clear. Adding command levels between Stavka and the battlefield makes things worse, not better. July 28, 1942. Stalin issues Order 227, not 1 step back. The primary source text is chilling. Panic makers and cowards must be liquidated on the spot, not a step back. 1 million Soviet soldiers are penalized under this order, shot for retreating, sent to penal battalions, imprisoned. Stavka overrides field commanders who try to conduct tactical withdrawals. A front commander sees his flank collapsing and wants to pull back 10 kilometers to a better position. Stavka says no. The men die where they stand, or they die as traitors. The centralization reaches its peak. Every significant decision flows through Moscow. Generals who won battles in 1941 are executed for losing them in 1942. The Red Army is held together by terror as much as patriotism. But while Stalin controls the regular army with an iron fist, another force is operating with surprising independence. May 30th, 1942. The central headquarters of the partisan movement is created in Moscow. It will operate until 1945. The leader is Panteleimon Ponomarenko, Belarusian, born 1902. After the war, he becomes head of the Ukrainian Communist Party. By 1943, the partisan movement reaches peak strength. 250,000 fighters, larger than many Soviet fronts. They conduct 6,000 sabotage operations in 1943 alone. Over the entire war, partisans destroy 18,000 locomotives. The German rear areas become a nightmare. On Belarus, 120,000 partisans operate, more than some regular Soviet armies. The surprise is organizational. The partisan headquarters has its own operational fronts, parallel to the regular military structure. Ponomarenko coordinates with Stavka, but runs largely independent operations. While the Red Army suffocates under centralized control, the partisans thrive on initiative. The contrast is stark. 2 command philosophies running simultaneously. One rigid, one flexible. Both fighting the same enemy. 1944. Zhukov plans Operation Bagration, 2.3 million troops, 5,000 tanks. The offensive inflicts 400,000 German casualties and destroys Army Group Center, the greatest Soviet victory of the war. February 25, 1946. Less than a year after victory. The Red Army is renamed the Soviet Army. Ground forces, specifically. Demobilization is massive. 11.5 million troops in 1945, reduced to 2.7 million across the USSR, 1.5 million in Europe by September 1946. The Land Forces Main Command is created. The first chief is Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the man who planned Bagration, the man who took Berlin. July 1946. Zhukov is demoted. Political rivalry with Stalin. Despite being the greatest Soviet general of the war, he is sent to command a minor military district. His successor is Marshal Ivan Konev, Russian, born 1897. Konev commanded the First Ukrainian Front at Berlin. The legacy of the war is written in blood. 8.7 million Soviet military dead. 14.7 million total when civilians are counted. The command structure that won the war, Stavka, fronts, armies, is kept. But the men who made it work are purged. 1950. The Land Forces Main Command is disbanded. Functions transferred to the General Staff. Troop strength drops to 2.8 million. The timing coincides with the Korean War. Some analysts suspect Stalin feared escalation and wanted tighter control through the General Staff. 1955. The Main Command is reformed. Post-Stalin de-Stalinization. 17 military districts now span the Soviet Union. March 7, 1964. The Defense Council disbands the Ground Forces Main Command again. The decision was made February 24th. Chiefs of Arms now report directly to Defense Minister Rodion Malinovsky. Marshal, Ukrainian, born 1898, dies 1967. Soviet strength in 1964 is 3.5 million troops, 40,000 tanks, a massive force with no unified ground command. November 5, 1967. The Main Command is recreated for the third time. Commander-in-Chief is Army General Ivan Pavlovsky, Russian, born 1909, dies 1985. Pavlovsky oversees Vietnam War aid logistics. More than 1,000 T-55 tanks shipped to North Vietnam. The pattern is bizarre. Create the command, disband it, recreate it, disband it again. Each change tied to geopolitical events, Korea, de-Stalinization, Vietnam. The command structure becomes a political tool as much as a military necessity. March 2, 1969. Damansky Island. The Sino-Soviet border erupts in gunfire. 58 Soviet troops killed, 72 Chinese dead. Fellow communists shooting each other over a frozen river island. The clash triggers structural change. 1969. The Central Asian Military District is created in Alma-Ata, Kazakh SSR. 43 degrees 15 minutes north, 76 degrees 53 minutes east. The 16th Military District. 50,000 troops, 1,000 tanks, positioned against China. The surprise is strategic. Tensions with NATO had existed for 2 decades without creating new districts. A single border firefight with Communist China forces bigger organizational change than the entire Cold War with the West. The lesson is clear. The Soviet command structure responds to political threats more than military ones, and the real revolution is about to begin in the Far East. February 8, 1979. Far Eastern High Command is established. Headquarters at Ulan-Ude, Buryatia. 51 degrees 50 minutes north, 107 degrees 36 minutes east. The first of 4 theater commands, also called strategic directions. Commander is Army General Vasily Petrov, Russian, born 1917. He controls 3 fronts plus the Pacific Fleet, 250 ships, 100 submarines. Total forces approximately 500,000 troops. The surprise is geographic. Headquarters placed inland at Ulan-Ude, not coastal Vladivostok. Survivability against nuclear strikes. Each front equals 4 armies, 150,000 to 200,000 troops per front. The High Command coordinates multiple fronts. They Structure is familiar. It is the direction system from 1941, the same organizational concept that Soviet analysts said often worsened leadership, the improvised headquarters that created confusion, but this time it is planned, permanent, tested in exercises. The question is whether the structure that failed in World War II will work in World War III. September 1984. 3 more high commands created simultaneously. Western High Command, Headquarters Legnica, Poland, Military Unit 3172, later moved to Smolensk July 1, 1991. Southwestern High Command, Headquarters Kishinev, Moldova, Southern High Command, Headquarters Baku, Azerbaijan. The first commander is General Yuri Maximov, September 1984 to July 1985. The forces are overwhelming. Western High Command alone controls approximately 1.5 million troops, 20,000 tanks, larger than the entire Wehrmacht in 1941. Each High Command integrates multi-front operations. 4 fronts equal an Army Group equivalent, plus naval and air assets. The Soyuz 83 exercise tested the Western High Command with full staff. Lessons from the direction failures in 1941 were applied. Automated command and control systems tested. Standardized logistics capable of 1,000 km/day advance rates. In exercises, each front outnumbered simulated NATO forces 3-1. This is the apex of Soviet military power. 4 theater commands controlling the majority of Soviet conventional forces. By 1984, 4 high command chiefs control enough firepower to execute theater nuclear war. Far East, Western, Southwestern, Southern. Total forces under high commands exceed 3 million troops, over 40,000 tanks, 4 fleets. Each high command is designed for theater warfare. Multi-domain operations decades before the United States adopts the concept. The comparison to NATO is stark. Each Soviet high command is larger than most NATO member militaries combined. The concept is taught at the Frunze Military Academy as theater integration, later studied by the U.S. Army War College. The command structure runs Stavka to high commands, to fronts, to armies, to divisions. After Pavlovsky reforms, each division is 10,500 men, the ultimate centralization. Every layer of command traces back to Moscow. The system that began with commissars overriding battalion commanders now has theater commands overriding entire army groups, political control embedded at every level, military logic subordinate to party doctrine. The paradox is complete. May 7, 1992. Boris Yeltsin issues a decree creating the Russian Armed Forces. Moscow. Yeltsin is Russian president, born 1931, dies 2007. Russia inherits Soviet remnants, 3 million troops, 70,000 tanks, 80% of the total. Soviet military. Mid-March 1992. Yeltsin appoints himself defense minister. Before the formal armed forces are even established, a constitutional gray zone. He assumes the supreme commander role, echoing Stalin's Stavka chairmanship. June 1993. Final dissolution. The CIS military headquarters is reorganized for cooperation. It becomes a paper entity. Soviet structures officially end. Other republics inherit forces. Ukraine gets 700,000 troops, 6,000 tanks. The high commands are dissolved. Western High Command moves from Legnica to Smolensk in July 1991, then disbanded. 74 years of command evolution ends. From Trotsky's 50,000 volunteers to 3 million troops. Not on a battlefield. In a bureaucratic decree, memorials mark what remains. Moscow Victory Park displays Stavka exhibits. The Kirch Monument lists 46,000 names from the North Caucasus disasters. Alma-Ata has a memorial to the wwii. 1969. Border Clash. The Central Armed Forces Museum in Moscow holds models of the high commands. Patriot Park displays tanks from the 40,000 vehicle peak. The debates continue. Did commissars save or doom the war effort? The consensus is mixed. They slowed decisions, but ensured loyalty against Tsarist officers who might have switched sides. U.S. Army Field Manual 100-2-1 studies the 1941 direction improvisation errors. The War College analyzes the 1979 high commands for lessons on multi-domain operations. Films like Stalingrad show Stavka overriding field commanders. Games like Hearts of Iron 4 model fronts and high commands. Books like Zhukov's Greatest Defeat examine the 1946 demotion. The Legnica High Command site is now a Polish military base. The former command post for 1.5 million troops is foreign soil. The paradox remains unresolved. The most centralized command structure in history won the largest war ever fought. Then could not survive peace. Commissars overriding commanders in 1918. Politicians dissolving armies in 1992. Political control always trumped military logic. From the first decree creating the Red Army to the last decree ending it, the Soviet command structure was never purely military. It was a political instrument wrapped in military organization. That was its strength. That was its fatal weakness. And that is why it no longer exists.